Walter White built an empire in the shadows, but secrets that big don't stay buried. From close allies to sworn enemies, these are the people who learned the truth about Heisenberg. Kicking off this list is, of course, Jesse Pinkman, the first person to know about Walter White's meth business. He knew from day one, right? I mean, how could he not? Walter White and Jesse Pinkman were like two peas in a pod, and Jesse's influence was huge in Walter's decision to start selling meth. Walt's knowledge of chemistry and his commitment to quality made their meth easily stand out from the competition. As part of their strategy to create a recognizable brand, Jesse and Walt developed a new method for making meth that used methylamine, resulting in a product with a unique blue color. They became so successful that the meteoric rise of blue sky crystal meth sent shockwaves through the market, leading to confrontations with established players who felt threatened by the new competition. Despite his criminal lifestyle, Jesse remained far more empathetic than Walt during their criminal careers. While Walt became immersed in the drug trade and had developed into a ruthless drug lord, motivated largely by vanity, ego, and greed. But Jesse never quite grasped the scale of it, not for a long time. At first, Walt was just Mr. White, the weird teacher who knew how to cook meth better than anyone. Jesse thought he was the brains, sure, but not a kingpin. Not a killer. It wasn't until later, until Jane died, until Brock got poisoned, until people started vanishing around Walt like flies that Jesse started to understand who Mr. White really was. And when he did, it broke him. Not just emotionally. It shattered whatever was left of his trust, his hope, his morality. He knew Walt was a monster, and he knew he helped build him. The next person to find out about Walter White's meth empire was Crazy 8, aka Domingo Gallardo Molina. Crazy 8's role as a meth dealer and DEA informant got complicated when he betrayed his cousin Emilio, leading to a misunderstanding between Emilio and Jesse Pinkman, who had been partners for a long time. Jesse got in trouble with Crazy 8 when he tried to sell Walt's new product, and Emilio thought he was the one who had told the DEA, but it was really his cousin. Upon arriving at Walt's makeshift laboratory, the RV, Emilio recognized him from a previous encounter with Hank, leading Crazy 8 to suspect Walt's involvement with law enforcement and plot his demise, until Walt offered to share his methamphetamine recipe. Emilio and Crazy 8 coerced Walt into revealing his formula at gunpoint, but Walt's manipulation of chemicals resulted in a small explosion, producing phosphine gas that incapacitated both men. This event ultimately led to the demise of Emilio and, days later, Crazy 8, marking the beginning of Walt's transformation into the notorious Heisenberg. Following Crazy 8's demise, Walter White and Jesse Pinkman needed a new distribution channel, which led them to the volatile and unpredictable Tuco Salamanca and his henchmen, all thanks to Jesse's friend, Skinny Pete. The inexperienced duo of Skinny Pete and Jesse soon found themselves in Tuco's headquarters, carrying a valuable cargo of Walt's meth, both having a misguided sense of confidence in their ability to negotiate a deal with the notorious Tuco Salamanca. What happened next was pretty predictable, if you ask me. After inspecting the crystal meth, Tuco expressed his appreciation for its quality, but his response to Jesse's offer was a vicious and unprovoked assault, which left Jesse battered and bruised with a broken rib and a neck injury that required a brace. This bagged Jesse an extended stay in the hospital. The news of the incident sparked a bold response from Walt, who presented himself to Tuco as Heisenberg and unleashed a calculated display of ruthlessness that left a lasting impression on the notorious Salamanca, securing a favorable agreement and cementing his reputation as a force to be reckoned with. Walter White's association with a Salamanca family member meant that his secret would inevitably be revealed to another key figure, Hector Salamanca. It all started when Tuco got busted by the DEA and took Walt and Jesse to Hector's place in the desert. While at Hector's place, Walt and Jesse thought Hector was a vegetable, but he was actually sharp and could communicate with his nephew using a bell. They discovered this harsh reality after Hector foiled their plans to escape when he saw Walt put poison in Tuco's burrito. He rang the bell furiously to warn Tuco. Tuco, who thought Hector wanted the bigger burrito to give it to him, oblivious to what was going on. But instead of eating it, Hector knocked it to the floor and pointed murderously toward Walt. Despite Tuco's initial confusion, Hector's persistent bell ringing eventually conveyed his distrust of Walt and Jesse, prompting Tuco to take drastic action against Jesse. The violent confrontation ended with Walt's confession and Tuco's subsequent death at the hands of Hank Schrader, which allowed the duo to flee. However, Hector's understanding of Walt's identity and appearance, as well as Jesse's description, was significantly enhanced because Tuco previously shared information from Walt and Jesse's driver's licenses and even showed him a picture of Walt's family. Although at odds here, Hector and Walt later worked together to eliminate a common enemy, which I will talk about soon. In the aftermath of Tuco's death at the hands of Hank Schrader, Walter White and Jesse decided to take control of their meth business, establishing a new meth distribution network, which brought them into contact with a new circle of associates: Skinny Pete, Combo, and Badger. One thing led to another, which left Jesse's mental state compromised. This forced Walter's intervention in the street aspect of the operation, which led to Skinny Pete and his associates encountering Heisenberg for the first time. Walter's commanding presence was evident, deterring them from attempting to deceive or manipulate him. Walt's secret was next revealed to Saul Goodman, who was a major player in his life. But the circumstances under which Saul Goodman learned about Walter White's secret were not particularly pleasant, despite their subsequent close collaboration. It all started when Badger got busted for selling Walt and Jesse's meth, and Saul decided to defend him. At Jesse's request, Walt met with Saul at his law office in a strip mall, with the goal of retaining his services as their lawyer. Having been previously persuaded by Kim to trust Saul's expertise, Walt agreed to meet with him, despite initial doubts. Jesse explained that they required a lawyer with a unique set of skills, a criminal lawyer who was also familiar with the underworld. After losing a coin toss, Walt entered Saul's office, where he introduced himself as Badger's uncle. Saul informed Walt that the DEA was pressuring Badger to reveal the identity of a mysterious figure known as Heisenberg, and initially insisted that Badger comply. However, when Walt offered him a substantial sum of money, Saul seemed to reconsider. Following a coughing fit, Walt returned to Jesse's car and reported that Saul had ejected him from the office for attempting to bribe him. In a desperate bid to resolve their situation, Walt and Jesse donned ski masks and abducted Saul, taking him to a shallow grave in a desert wasteland. A terrified Saul believed that the situation was related to Lalo's threat to return for answers about Jimmy's knowledge of Nacho's actions. However, when Jesse demanded that he speak English, Saul realized that they were not associated with Lalo. Jesse expressed confusion about Saul's mention of Lalo, and Saul was relieved to discover that they were not connected to the cartel. Jesse then instructed Saul to provide Badger with exceptional legal representation, while warning him that he would be killed if anyone informed the DEA. Saul suggested that killing Badger would be a solution, but Jesse refused to consider it. After identifying Walt as the Mr. Mayhew from his office, thanks to another coughing fit, Saul directed Walt and Jesse to remove their masks and each place $1 in his pocket, thus establishing a confidential relationship. With their conversation now protected by attorney-client privilege, Saul assessed their situation, stating, "Prison is inevitable for someone. The only question is who will be incarcerated." Following payment for his services, Saul re-entered the RV with Walt and Jesse, where he noticed their chemistry equipment and deduced that they were the manufacturers of the blue stuff. It was at this point that Saul realized Walt's secret identity as the infamous Heisenberg. His association with Walter White would ultimately lead to the most regrettable decision of his career. Gus Fring and Mike Ehrmantraut were the next to discover Walter White's secret identity as Heisenberg. Mike is the guy who saw Walt for what he was from the jump. He respected his intelligence but never liked or trusted him. Ever. To Mike, Walt was always a time bomb. Useful, yes, but unstable, dangerous, arrogant, and Mike wasn't wrong. Gus should have listened to Mike's warnings, but the temptation of Walt's 99% pure meth was too great, leading to a perilous partnership that ultimately unraveled. Gus knew Walt was brilliant, but he also saw the ego, the chaos, the unpredictability, and he hated it. Still, he needed Walt for a time, until he didn't. When Gus attempted to sever their partnership, Walt resorted to extreme measures determined to protect his own life and Jesse's, which were now at risk. Gus, who was Heisenberg before Heisenberg, the OG kingpin with the chicken front and the iron discipline, got a first-hand taste of Walt's scheming and ruthlessness, and he got outplayed by a literal teacher dying of cancer. That face-melting moment in the nursing home? That's what knowing Walter White gets you. Like Gus, Mike also messed up by working with Walt, and it cost him his life. Huel Babineau and Patrick Kuby, members of Saul Goodman's elite security team, dubbed the A-Team, were bound to learn Walter White's secret as Saul's involvement with him deepened. While Saul and many others who associated with Walter White suffered dire consequences, their fates were distinct, and one might argue they were more fortunate. Huel was a small-time player who got caught up in the mess. After Hank and Gomez, who had taken him under false pretense, were killed, the DEA had to let him go, and he went back to New Orleans. After Hank uncovered Walt's secret, Walt directed Saul to send Kuby and Huel to the storage facility, holding his drug profits. The two men were tempted by the vast wealth and began to fantasize about their newfound riches. Huel proposed Mexico as a possible haven, but Kuby's pragmatism prevailed, reminding him of Walt's brutal tactics. They then packed the money into barrels, loaded them into a van, and delivered it to Walt. Despite the circumstances, Kuby took advantage of the situation and absconded with some of the cash, effectively buying his liberty. Walt knew what Kuby did, but he had bigger fish to fry. Francesca Liddy, a former secretary at Saul Goodman and Associates, became the next individual to learn Walter's secret. She had previously served as Saul Goodman's personal receptionist before his retirement from legal practice. Francesca may not have liked Saul, but she stuck by him. Francesca Liddy's interactions with Walter and Jesse Pinkman were marked by disdain, as she viewed them as foolish and even leveraged this perception to extract $25,000 from Walt in exchange for Saul's contact information. Her demeanor towards Saul was equally frosty, as evidenced by her scoffing at his goodbye hug and demanding additional payment for disposing of incriminating evidence. Despite her clear dislike for Saul, Francesca followed his instructions when questioned by the police, possibly indicating a reluctance to cooperate with law enforcement. Even months later, she remained in contact with Saul, albeit begrudgingly, before ultimately severing ties. Jane Margolis's relationship with Jesse provided her with a unique perspective on Walter White's questionable actions. Now this one's debatable. Did Jane know Walter White was Heisenberg? Not completely, but she suspected. She knew Jesse was involved in something dark with Walt. She knew money was coming in and that Walt had some twisted control over Jesse. Jane's influence on Jesse ultimately posed a challenge for Walter White, as she enabled Jesse's addiction and leveraged it to coerce Walt into releasing Jesse's share of the money. And in a chilling twist, Walt watched her die. He could have saved her but didn't. While Jane may not have known the full extent, she definitely saw enough of the darkness to make Walt feel the guilt, even if he buried it deep. Although unexpected, the next person on the list to have a glimpse of Walter White's dark side was his little girl, Holly White. Holly's birth was a pleasant surprise for the White family, as Skylar's labor caught them off guard. Ted Beneke, Skylar's supervisor, played a supportive role during this time, escorting Skylar to the hospital and remaining by her side until Walt, who was busy with drug-related activities, arrived. Walt was overjoyed with the arrival of Holly, and in a moment of paternal pride, he shared his illicit earnings with her in a symbolic gesture. Holding her in the garage, he revealed his hidden stash of money, explaining that he had done it all for her benefit. Holly indeed saw her dad's dark side, even if she won't remember it. Some guessed, some found out the hard way. Not all lived to tell. Hit like, smash subscribe, and drop your take on who saw it coming. Now let's talk about Walt's wife, Skylar. Skylar didn't have the luxury of gradual realization. Her arc was a gut punch of dread and suspicion. At first it was the late nights, the burner phones, the weird behavior. Then came the cash. Then came the lies. Then came the car wash. Skylar knew something was up, and once she cornered Walt, he didn't deny it. Remember that moment? I'm not in danger, Skylar. I am the danger. That was her official induction into the Heisenberg Club. And she didn't just know, she became part of the operation. Money laundering, silent complicity, moral compromise. You could argue that knowing turned Skylar from victim to co-conspirator. But did she really know how bad it was? The murders? The manipulations? The poisonings? Not until it was way, way too late. With her husband's behavior growing more erratic, Skylar turned to Pamela Orbeck, her divorce lawyer, for guidance and support, hoping to find answers to the questions plaguing her. As Skylar opened up to Pamela, she shared sensitive information about her marriage, including Walt's role as a methamphetamine manufacturer. Pamela's questions about their finances seemed to alarm Skylar, who appeared to be reevaluating her decision to divorce, potentially due to concerns about the unexplained wealth. Pamela advised Skylar to sue for divorce and offered to help bring Walt to justice. In the end, Skylar just couldn't go through with it. Unlike others who escaped unscathed, Gail Bodeker's encounter with Heisenberg ended in tragedy. Gail was a gifted chemist, idealistic and deeply respectful of Walt's brilliance. Thanks to Gus making him Walt's assistant in the lab, due to Jesse's absence at the time, he knew Walt was the cook behind the purest meth on the market. Although he may not have fully grasped the depth of his criminal empire, his admiration blinded him to the danger of working with Walt until it was too late. When Jesse kills Gail to protect Walt, it's a moment that seals both their fates, and reminds us that knowing Walt White could be a death sentence. Given their roles as loyal enforcers and senior figures in Gus Fring's enterprise, it is unsurprising that Victor and Tyrus are the next names on the list. Much like Gail, Victor and Tyrus met with grim and unpleasant deaths. A significant factor contributing to Victor's downfall was his careless mistake of being identified by neighbors at the scene of Gail's death and leaving his car behind, an error unbefitting an individual of his expertise. To make matters worse, he demonstrated the ability to cook meth in an effort to render Walter White and Jesse useless to Gus Fring. But instead of praises, he was met with a box cutter to the neck from Gus, who made him a good example to the others. Gus is just a master at tying any loose ends. Just like Victor, Tyrus's death came soon after to Walt's deep schemes. He got blasted to pieces in a retirement home and died alongside Gus, loyal till the end. Todd Alquist and the Vamonos Pest crew were the next to learn Walt's secret. Todd's association with Vamonos Pest, a company founded by Ira and later acquired by Mike Ehrmantraut, Walter White, and Jesse Pinkman, was marked by his ambition and desire for more, setting him apart from the others who were content to keep their involvement discreet. Todd was an interesting one, because he knew. He really knew. He saw Walt kill. He saw him manipulate Jesse. He watched him orchestrate entire operations with the cold precision of a war general. And Todd, he idolized him for it. Todd didn't just know Walt was a drug lord, he wanted to be just like him. That quiet admiration made him even more terrifying, because there was no moral conflict, just fascination. The neo-Nazis? They didn't care. Walt was a means to an end. Money. Power. They knew he was Heisenberg, but they weren't scared of him. Until they should have been. Todd Alquist ultimately met his demise at the hands of Jesse Pinkman, who strangled him to death shortly after Walter White had eliminated the neo-Nazi group. Next up is Lydia Rodart Quayle, a Madrigal executive who worked with Walt to sell meth worldwide. And yes, she knew exactly what she was getting into. Lydia always operated in shadows. She likes things clean, distant, and untraceable. But Walt was a nuclear bomb in a porcelain shop. Still, she did business with him, because the product was just that good. She knew who he was, what he was. She also knew that he killed Gus Fring. That's why she kept trying to kill him off once he got too messy. But Walt knew too, and that's why Walt took her down with him, poisoning her with ricin in the finale. Jack Welker and his white supremacist gang became Walt's muscle late in the series. Jack's competence was evident in his ability to eliminate the 10 men linked to Gus that Walt had identified as a threat and deemed necessary to neutralize while behind bars. They knew everything about Walt's operation and eventually took it over in one of the saddest displays throughout the series. An act that broke Walt completely after it cost Hank his life. But they didn't stop there. After killing Hank and Steve Gomez, they enslaved Jesse and continued to cook meth under the Heisenberg name. Walt, being Walt, never forgot what they did to him, as their greed and brutality later embody the final stage of Walt's legacy. We all remember that scene. One click of a remote control and a machine gun hidden in the trunk of Walt's car ended Jack Welker's reign of terror forever. Declan and his crew also found out about Walt's secret, and it didn't end well for them. The power vacuum created by Heisenberg's retirement led to Declan's ascension, who promptly appointed Todd as the primary cook. However, Todd's inability to maintain the product's quality led to his dismissal, and Declan reinstated his original cook. Lydia's subsequent meeting with Declan and his team at their secret lab highlighted the significant shortcomings of their methamphetamine, which she claimed was unsuitable for the Czech market, resulting in substantial lost revenue. Declan's refusal to reform or rehire Todd ultimately sealed his fate, as Jack Welker and his gang, acting on Lydia's instructions, launched a surprise attack, leaving Declan mortally wounded and ultimately dead. Shot in the head by Jack. Hank, Marie, Walt Jr., and Steve found out the truth at different times. Oh, Hank. Smart, cocky, good-hearted Hank. The irony of the DEA agent chasing Heisenberg while living under the same roof as him? Peak Breaking Bad. And yet, when Hank found out, it wasn't from intel or surveillance or wiretaps, it was a freaking book. Gail's copy of Leaves of Grass, sitting innocently in Walt's bathroom. I mean, who do you figure that is, huh? Willy Wonka? The instant Hank made the connection, the light bulb moment was horrifying. The guy he barbecued with, his brother-in-law, the guy who babysat his wife's kids, that was Heisenberg. And once Hank knew, it was all downhill. He became a man possessed, investigating Walt in secret, setting up sting operations, desperately trying to bring him down before Walt could disappear. Tragically, that knowledge is what got him killed. Hank knew, and it cost him everything. Ed Galbraith, the guy who helps people disappear, was one of the last to find out. With his expertise, Ed Galbraith was able to provide Saul and Walt with new lives, and he possessed intimate knowledge of their histories, including their real names, crimes, and secrets. He's calm and professional, and he keeps secrets better than anyone else in the show. By the end of Breaking Bad, the truth is out. News broadcasts reveal that Walter White, former chemistry teacher, was the infamous drug lord Heisenberg. His face is on every screen. The public knows. The DEA knows. The legend is out of the shadows. But it comes too late to save Hank, to heal Jesse, or to repair Walt's family. The damage is done. Walt's desire to keep his identity hidden collapses under the weight of his own pride. He wanted to be remembered. Now he always will be, for all the wrong reasons. Thanks for watching. If you're a fan of Breaking Bad, click on the next video to watch more.